Another month has gone by, and it is time for my monthly September wrap-up. So let's get into it right now. The first book we read this month was Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. It is a horror romance. It's about vampires. It takes place in the 1800s in Mexico. At first, it was a little slow to get going, but once it gets going, you're off to the races. Like, I couldn't put it down once it picked up, but it did take a little bit to get into it. You know, you gotta do all the character building and the past history of what happened and all that stuff. So, follows these two characters, Nina and Nestor, and they loved each other since the time they were kids. And they had heard this story about, in this one area, like, if you see these glowing orbs, it means there's buried treasure there. And so one night, these two, they sneak out, they're like 13 years old, and to this area where Nestor had seen these glowing orbs. Like, we're gonna go find this treasure. They sneak out and then they see this orb and they're like, oh my god. So they start going towards it and all of a sudden the orb winks out. And then they see that they're not alone and some creature comes and it attacks Nina. Nestor fights it off and then she's just kind of laying there. So he picks her up and runs her back home to her family and lays her down on the ground, and the mom's yelling, she's dead, she's dead. The dad's looking at him like he wants to kill him, and so he takes off, gets the F out of Dodge, leaves. He thinks she's dead, never looks back. Well, turns out she didn't die that night. And years later, he returns. When they find out that he came back, she thought he just left, that he just peaced out and left her. She didn't know, none of her family ever told her that, oh, well, he thought you were dead. So he thought he was going to be in trouble. But anyway, so she thinks he left her. He thought she was dead this whole time. And so now they got to work their crap out and figure it out. They go on this crazy journey because it's war and she's a curandera. So she's going to go and he's going to go too. And there are vampires and it's crazy and it's good. So the next thing I read was Approved for Haunting by Patrick Barb, which is a collection of short stories just in time for spooky season. There are, I can't remember how many stories. 18 maybe? There might be more. There might be less, give or take, we'll say. They're really fantastic, just a really great collection. Some of my favorites, there's one about this pet. There's this old man and his pet escapes and he's talking to this lady at her house and he keeps correcting her that this pet is not a dog. And then she starts to wonder what this pet is. And why is this old man at her house? He thinks maybe he lost his pet around this area, and she's got her baby upstairs. And stuff starts to get real weird and creepy, and then there's another story about trees and nature coming back and taking their revenge that I thought was fantastic. And my favorite story, and it was about this guy, I can't remember his name, but it's called Return of Voodoo Village. And there's this weird, creepy village that, there's all those rumors that have been going around for years about human sacrifices. There's all kinds of weird stuff that happened there. And this guy had gone there when he was a teenager. And he has all these weird memories of that night, but then he also dreams about it and he's not sure what's real and what actually happened and what happened to his friends. And so he decides he's going to return and try and figure out what actually happened that night. And it gets all crazy and messed up, and it's a wild ride. It is a really great collection of stories. I would highly recommend Approved for Haunting by Patrick Barb. Makes you want to sit around a campfire, roast some marshmallows, and tell spooky stories in the dark. I mean, heck yeah, you can't beat it. Then I read Goodbye Hello by Adam Berry, and this is a book that's a little more heavy subject matter. It's about grief and loss and processing death, but doing that through the eyes of the paranormal. And Adam Berry, if you don't know who that is, he is the co-host of Kindred Spirits, which is a show about ghosts and going to these different locations to try and help and see what these spirits are trying to tell people and whatnot. And just his experience of being in this industry for several years, how it has evolved his look at death and dying and just his thoughts on it. And it's really well written. It's never a boring moment, because I know sometimes you read nonfiction and it can be boring and eye glazing. It's not. It kept my interest. I kind of flew through it. It's something I'd want to read again, maybe a few times, just because you get more out of it. But it's so full of his personality. He's such a brilliant, bright, awesome persona. He's funny. I laughed. I freaking cried. There's some parts where I lost my crap and just sad because, well, yeah, the subject matter, grief, death, dying, yes, it's gonna be sad, but it's so good. It's so freaking good. I cannot recommend it enough. I read some really great books this month. Like, seriously. The next book I read was a graphic novel called Juliet, or The Ghosts Return in Spring. And it has beautiful watercolor illustration, and it's just about kind of the messiness of life. This girl returns home after being in Paris and goes back to see her family, and everybody's having affairs. Grandma's eating the tablecloth. Stuff's all messed up. She ends up with this like kind of drunk boyfriend, and it's a mess. And it was, you know, sad and sweet, maybe more so bittersweet. Then we read Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. This is my first Chuck Tingle book. It was pretty great, and it's a horror book about conversion camps. There are these Christian camps where they try to convert gay people into straight people, which the fact that these actually exist in real life is effed up. I don't understand what the rationale of this. It seems based in hatred and ignorance to me personally. Just the horror of what it is and how the twisted ideas of what these people thought they were doing was right, and it was just so horrible and wrong. And the direction that Chuck Tingle took this book was really fantastic. Like, some of the parts in the beginning might be a little bit hard to read and get into because it's all like, praise God, God is good, and da-da-da-da. And like, I always find that cringy and awkward. The way he takes the horror of the reality of this and then puts it into a horror situation, but just how it all comes out in the end and the way that he spends it is really well done and really fantastic. And I would be curious to read more Chuck Tingle books. The next book I read was, I guess, the darling of booktube. I don't know if it's the darling of booktube. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. It is a dragon-filled smut fest. There's action, adventure, sexual escapades. It was a super fun read. I had a lot of fun with that book. Can I say? People either loved it or hated it. I don't know. I liked it a lot. I thought it was a fun read, didn't take itself too seriously, and I am excited for the next one to come out. Sometimes even I like smut. Alright, so the next thing I read was House of Bad Memories by Michael David Wilson. And this book, it's a creepy, disturbing, wild ride about this guy, Denny. Denny just wants to be a good dad. He wants to raise his kid right. He had a really horrible upbringing with a POS who beat the crap out of him and a stepsister. He just wants to have a good life with his family. Then he starts seeing Frank, like, in weird spots. Like, he sees him in the popcorn ceiling or whatever and keeps seeing him. And then he finds out that Frank has passed away. He's like, oh, maybe, who knows, you know. But then he keeps seeing Frank. And then, you know, smells Frank's cigarette smoke. And then him and Frank have a few conversations. Some stuff's really weird. And so he goes to the funeral because, you know, support his mom and his stepsister and whatnot. Frank's two buddies named Butcher and Slaughter, you know, some good guys or not. They think maybe that Denny had something to do with Frank's death. And they want to have a nice little chat with him. And then Jade, Frank's actual daughter and his half-sister, she has some questions too. And so Denny's not going to be leaving town after the funeral until he answers some questions. And stuff gets messed up. There was some gross stuff in this book, so please read your content warnings if you read it. But I thought it was great. I freaking loved it. Jade is insane and is the best character in this book. She makes the whole book. She's awesome. I had a fun time with that one. Next, we read the trippiest, weirdest, I felt like I was underwater the whole time just waiting to come up for air and breathe, and that was Rouge by Mona Awad. It's about this girl, Belle, growing up with her mom, Noelle, and Noelle was like this great beauty, like movie star quality looks, just gorgeous. She always felt like second fiddle and that she was not pretty enough and this, that, and the other. And so she always, you know, had kind of a complex that, you know, such as daughters can get from their parents and mothers and whatnot. So she grew up with this like lifelong obsession with skincare products. Eventually, she lives in Montreal, her mom lives in California, and eventually her mom ends up passing away by this tragedy that she fell off the cliffs and fell onto these rocks. So she goes to the funeral. She's at the funeral, you know, she goes out on the balcony and wants to get some air, and there's this beautiful woman in red who like gives her her condolences, and then it's like, your mother went the way of roses. And Belle finds this weird, and she's like, what? The way of roses? And she's like, what? And then these other people come up and talk to her and are like, blah, 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 blah. And by the time she turns around to talk to this woman in red again, the woman in red is poof, gone. So Belle is like, well, first of all, her mom hated roses. And second of all, she was allergic to them. So I don't know why that lady would say that. So night comes. And she's going through some of her mom's stuff, and she finds these red shoes that she used to wear when she was a kid. She'd put them on and whatnot. So she puts them on her feet. And then she finds herself like walking along the edge of this cliff and walking up, and she comes to this house. Big glass windows and this ornate black fence and these beautiful roses all growing in the yard. And she walks to the fence opens up wide. There's this lady in silver that looks all glamorous at the door. She ushers her in, and she comes, and there's this big gala party going on. People are drinking this red bubbly, talking about it tastes like sipping stars. There's the lady in red that was at the funeral is up on the stairwell, and she's standing with these two people next to her that have these black veils over their faces. She calls to her to come up to the stairs, and everyone's like, they never do this or whatever, and they're all jealous, and they're like, I envy, and blah 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 blah. So she goes up there and she's trying to figure out like what this place is, and she's like, maybe it's a spa or whatnot, because she sees in the corner there's like this little area that has all these red ruby red jars, and she had noticed those jars all around her mother's place. Curious and curiouser, and it's such a weird fever dream of a book. It is fantastic. I loved it. It's trippy. It's so trippy. I love trippy, weird, fever dream, David Lynch, MFing feeling type of books. MFing. It's freaking weird. I said it's great about every book because I feel like I have so far. I read some really great ones, you guys. Next one I read was another graphic novel, and it's Soyi by Juji Ito. It follows his character, Soyi. I'm not sure if I'm saying that name right, so I do apologize. He curses people, and it's really weird and creepy. The illustrations are great. It was a fun book. I haven't read a ton of Juji Ito yet, but this one was pretty alright. See, I didn't say I love this one and it's amazing. Okay, so not all of them were. The next book I read was Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. Book comes out on Halloween. It is a book about when life rains down bad thing after bad thing after bad thing and just really just get you down. It's about this couple, Anna and Reed. Anna's paralyzed after when she gave birth to her child, there was like some sort of accident that happened. Their landlord in their crappy apartment is this racist POS named Frank, and he's just pretty horrible. And the husband, his mom had passed away, and just a lot of really bad crap happened all at once. And then things start to look up a little bit. They win this lottery for this really fancy apartment in New York City. It's going to be a lot more affordable for them. And so they go to live in this new apartment building, and stuff starts to get a little bit weird. Like, the door guys are kind of weird. They stare straight ahead and kind of creepy. And the concierge guy like smiles way too much, like Joker style smiling. I don't know. It just creeps him out. And then there's like some weird gremlin goblin type guy in the elevator that is super creep. And they never seem to run into anyone in their building. Like, never hear any noise. Very quiet. And one day, Anna, she goes in the baby's room, and she's of the new place, and she's looking out the window, and she's trying to figure out like what looks different. I think looks different when she looks at her. She doesn't know why or what. And one day she comes in there and the window is open. She's like, why is the window open? Oh, I must have opened it or something. Da 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 da. And then this happens again. And then she notices these weird like little like bite marks on the baby. And then stuff starts to get real weird from there. Eventually she meets the next door neighbor, and it's quite a disturbing experience. Especially because the neighbor thinks that her baby's killing her, not Anna's baby. Like, the neighbor has a baby, and apparently that baby's draining the life out of her or something. Who knows? It's a story about surviving and finding strengths you didn't know you had, getting through the worst of the worst, and then throw a supernatural element into it. And it's awesome. It's super awesome. I love this book so much. Like, I read Mary by Nat Cassidy. Fantastic. This one I think I liked even more. Oh. It's so good. See, I'm saying it again, and I'm like, it's so good, but it is. The next book I read was Night's Edge by Liz Karen, another vampire book. This one was a little bit different. It almost treated the vampire thing as like a pandemic of vampires. So it follows the story of these two characters, the daughter and the mom. And the mom is a vampire. It kind of like goes back and forth between when the mom was turned and how she was turned, and the horrible jerkhole that turned her and whatnot, and how they get him out of her life and all of that. And it's pretty disturbing. Mom seems kind of selfish at times and whatnot, but the daughter every day takes a needle to her arm, gives her mom a cup of blood so she can go and like exist in society. And it's not the best existence, you know, because she still can't go out during the day because she'll burn up in the sun as per vampire lore. Around like everywhere else, if you go out, they have to scan you in places to make sure you're not a vampire. So you have to like prick your finger and they test your blood to make sure that you're not a vamp, and that you're not going to take people home and, you know, suck them dry or whatever. And so it's the story of the daughter just not being able to ever have a normal life. She can't have friends. She can't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or she can't have a significant other because her mom is somewhat of an issue because, you know, she's a vampire. You can't really bring someone on and be like, yeah, my mom is this. And they're called Sarahs after this, something to do with a Saratov something. I don't know if it's Saratov syndrome or whatever. When it first happens and people start turning into vampires, they don't let people go out at night. There's a curfew, all of that. People have to stay in. It's a story of what it's like to be this daughter and mother, and the mother still being kind of selfish, and the daughter not being able to have friends and have a normal life, and what that does to her, and like, will she ever break away and break free from it? Well, I don't know. You have to read it to find out. I thought it was a pretty great book. I really enjoyed it. If you are a fan of videos where I talk about multiple things that I have read or am reading or I'm gonna read, the next video coming up will be about that, so stick around, check it out. And if you had fun hanging out today, hit that subscribe button, come back, see me again, and we'll talk about more bookish things and weird stuff.